Hello, everybody. Hey, it's great to be here. And as you saw from that video, what our plan is the weekend of November 20th and 21st. That's when we are going to take our one day to feed the world offering. And it is an offering that's over and above your tithe. And so what I would encourage families to do and individuals to do is to consider figuring out what a one day's wage is for you and consider giving that to Convoy of Hope. Now, the one thing that I love about Convoy of Hope is I actually got to go to Haiti with them a little over a month ago and got to see firsthand what they're doing. And we went to different orphanages and schools and churches that they are feeding these kids. Now, when that video was made, he said it was about 11,000 that they're feeding, but it's gone up that they've been able to feed over 30,000 in Haiti a day. And their goal around the world in 2011 is to raise enough money through one day to feed the world campaigns and churches to be able to feed 100,000 kids a day. And so Hal Donaldson, who was speaking there, has an incredible heart and is so genuine how he's really caring for the poor. Now, the one thing that I love about Convoy of Hope is because of their corporate connections, if you give $1 to Convoy of Hope, they can buy literally $7 to $10 worth of supplies. I mean, that's a pretty good way of investing, isn't it? I wish we could do that on Wall Street. And so I highly endorse one day, and the one thing some of you probably have heard is Hurricane Tomas has hit Haiti, and I looked in the news and there was extreme flooding, and what they know right now is 6 people were killed in the flooding. But when you see the conditions that the people live in there, and you think of the one city, they said that they were under 3 meters of water. The great thing is with that warehouse that Convoy of Hope has there in Haiti, that warehouse is full of supplies, and I know that they're already strategizing to take those supplies to churches and have those churches disseminate those goods to people in need. The people living in tent cities in Haiti, it's just incredible. I just can't imagine what it's like now with 65-mile-an-hour winds that just went through there. So what a great thing for us to partner with an organization like Convoy of Hope. Last year we gave over $48,000 for that, and my hope is this year we give well over that. So be in prayer for that, okay? Now, as far as a local thing that we are doing to help feed the poor, is this Thanksgiving is we are doing an outreach for that. And we've done this in the past. It actually started out 5 years ago where we sent out 50 meals. This year we have planned to send out 800 meals to people that are lock-ins, to the poor that aren't able to provide for themselves. And so we need help, obviously. So if you could help cook the meals on Wednesday, if you could help deliver meals on Thursday, if you could help come clean on Wednesday night after they cook, if you could help provide turkeys, whatever you would like to do, please check in the groups desk, the outreach desk, when you leave, go through into the atrium on the left, and talk to those folks, and they can tell you how you can be signed up. The other thing that is a great thing to announce is last week. It didn't happen in this service, but some of you may have heard on Sunday morning, we literally had kind of like a little revival going on here. And we offered people to receive Christ and come forward for baptism at the end of the sermon, and especially 11 o'clock service, just this whole front was full, and the line was going halfway down there, and we were here for almost 45 minutes after the service was over, baptizing people. Yeah, that's pretty cool, isn't it? So, we were totally caught off guard by this, and there's no way you can kind of plan for something like this. And so if you were a part of that and you came forward to get baptized, we have new believers packets at the information desk, and we would just encourage you to go and pick one of those up. Or if you know someone who came pick one up for them. Okay, so you can get that as you leave here. Now, transitioning now into the message. November is targeted for the last 3 years as our social justice month. And we just want to do that every November because I think this is something that is important for us to grab hold of God's heart for how he wants the church to respond to those that are suffering and those who are oppressed in the world. Now, this topic that I'm talking about tonight is this topic was something I've heard about, but I haven't done, honestly, a lot of research. And the more I started doing research on you will leave here probably depressed. So I just want to warn you, this isn't one of those feel-good kind of sermons. So the topic I want to talk about today is human trafficking. Now, I went to a Bible study and I heard this woman say that she used to be involved in this underground movement of human trafficking here in Grand Junction before she came to Christ. And so I asked her if I could have coffee with her. So I go into this coffee just totally naive to this whole thing. And so I said, now come on, is this really going on here in Grand Junction? And she just said, if you only knew, it would blow you away. I said, well, what's going on? She says, there are a multitude of gangs that are infiltrating Grand Junction. And she says, Grand Junction is a crossroads city. So we got Highway 50, we got I-70, we got kind of these main thoroughfares. And so gangs kind of target Junction as one of those cities to obtain people, women in particular, and young girls for human trafficking. And then they will ship them and distribute them off to other places in the country. And I said, well, how do they do it? And she says, well, they know how to pick out a young person or a woman walking down the street that looks really vulnerable, that looks lonely. And you probably have heard of this kind of stuff. And so they'll befriend them. And they offer them these false kinds of promises. We'll give you a job. We'll give you shelter, and we'll protect you. We'll give you food. And then she says what they do is they get them hooked on drugs like crystal meth. And when you get hooked on crystal meth, it is such an insidious addiction that you'll do anything for that next trick. Are you kind of following me on this? And so what they'll do is we'll give you some more if you go do this prostitutions. And they'll have girls that she called the pass-around girls, that among the gang members, they have young girls that they just pass around and use them. And then they have other girls that they will actually use for prostitution. I said, in Junction, there's prostitution? She goes, oh, yeah. And I said, well, where are you finding prostitutes? She goes, you go down to Main Street, and she says, I can pick them out a mile away. And I'm just thinking, man, I am so naive. And as she's telling me all the stuff that's going on with the gangs and organized crime in this area, and she told me other stories, she goes, don't ever tell anyone these stories. And I can't really say what she told me, but it just was like, it threw me back in the back of my chair like, holy cow, I have missed it. You know, because this is one of those things that, quite honestly, in middle-class suburbia, we kind of hear about these things, but we really don't believe it's going on here. She says it could be happening in your neighborhood. Because she said they appear to look normal and they want to live in normal neighborhoods because it's a front, but they have underground stuff going in white-collar, middle-class neighborhoods. They don't want to be noticed. Now, you're going to be paranoid of all your neighbors when you go from here, aren't you? She said that in Mexico, the drug cartels, they love young blonde girls with either blue or green eyes. And she said they will pay $10,000 for a young girl. And so these people know that if they find one of these young girls, they'll just ship them down to Mexico, automatic $10,000. And that's the kind of stuff that's going on right here. The statistics show in the U.S. that there are 100 to 300,000 kids per year that are taken into human trafficking, especially for the sex trades. Sex trafficking in Colorado is the third largest money-producing activity of organized crime. Now, I looked this up that the United Nations had a protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. This was back in 2000. And this trafficking protocol defines human trafficking as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power, or of a position of vulnerability, or of the giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. Now, what's included in human trafficking is not only the sex trades, but is actually slavery, that there is human slavery going on around the world, and they say even in the U.S. Exploitation shall include at a minimum the exploitation of prostitution of others or other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labor or services, there's slavery, practices similar to slavery, servitude are the removal of organs. They will actually sell people for their organs. The consent of the victim of trafficking in persons to the intended exploitation set forth above shall be irrelevant where any of the means set forth above have been used. Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, she was quoted as saying modern slavery, be it bonded labor, involuntary servitude, or sexual slavery, is a crime and cannot be tolerated in any culture, community, or country. It is an affront to our values and our commitment to human rights. So, as I was doing some research, we found out about a great ministry in Timberline Church in Fort Collins, and I talked to Bonnie Northrup, the wife of Derry Northrup, the pastor there, and they have a great ministry that they started called the You Count campaign. And they allowed us to use this video that kind of gives us an exposure to this incredible problem of human trafficking. So let's watch this video. crazy, isn't it? They say that human trafficking is tied with selling of illegal weapons as the number 2 money-producing activity in organized crime in the world. The only thing that it trails behind is, of course, the sale of illegal drugs. United Nations reports that globally it's a annual business of $42.5 billion in this industry. And, you know, it's easy to understand that the motivation behind it, of course, is money. It's power, it's control over people, and it's a global issue, and obviously prostitution is the driving force behind this. And I just kind of thought of, have you heard of no-see-ums? If you've been in Minnesota, anyone from Minnesota, you know these little tiny bugs called no-see-ums, and you can't really see them unless you really look for them. They're like little gnats, but they are very devious, and they'll just eat you alive. And you know they're there, but you can't see them, and they just make your life miserable. I kind of saw human trafficking is like it's the no-see-ums of our culture today. That it's so hidden and it's so underground, and for most of us, it's something that we don't even think about. It's really not on our grid, is it? But when we get educated over the issue of human trafficking, it should be something that kind of stirs something up in us. Like, we should do something about this. We can't just stand by and let these women and children and men that are trapped in this slavery and bondage and their lives totally wrecked with all of their rights totally taken from them and so violated. You know, we see poverty everywhere. Poverty is easy to see. It's when poverty's there, it's so in your face. But unless we go to areas that have the red light districts, we just don't know it's there. It's difficult to stop. It's not something that we can just see, oh, that kid's in human trafficking, I think I'll just take her home with me. We can't do that, can we? And because of how organized crime is so entrenched with it could get pretty messy. It could get outright dangerous if we got truly involved in trying to stop it. And the question is, should we? You know, is the church mandated to do anything about this? And I think when you look at the Bible and the scriptures, there are many different ways that the scripture looks at how we should address issues like this. Leviticus 19:29 says, it's not in a slide, I found this recently, it says, do not degrade your daughter by making her a prostitute. This is in the Bible. And it says, or the land will turn to prostitution and be filled with wickedness. And so the reality is when prostitution is allowed in a culture, it allows wickedness, darkness to infiltrate, and it can take over the very moral fiber of our society. And this is what we can experience here, what we are experiencing. Now, I found this thing from the book Fields of the Fatherless, and it's the book of the month for November, for those of you that are interested, by Tom Davis. And he talks about, in the scriptures, this thing called the ancient boundary. And what the ancient boundary is that the scriptures command us to always leave a portion of our crops for the poor. That's the ancient boundary. And so as you glean your field, you may leave just a corner of your field that you don't go into, and you leave that for the poor. And the scripture talks about this ancient boundary in Deuteronomy 24:17. It says, do not deprive the alien or the fatherless of justice. Do you see that thing about justice? Or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. That is why I command you to do this. When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the alien, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the alien, the fatherless, and the widow. When you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for the alien, the fatherless, and the widow. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. That is why I command you to do this. Now it's interesting, this first verse, verse 17, take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. This is talking about is taking something from a person and holding it over them as a means of manipulating them to get something of gain for yourself. That's exactly what happens in human trafficking. They threaten their life. They may threaten their families that if you don't do this, we'll go back and kill your family. There's so many ways that they threaten and coerce people. And so, as this strip of land is supposed to be left for the fatherless, for the widows, for those that are oppressed, what it's speaking of is that we would always have a margin in our resources. And we would leave that margin. It would be available to be given to those in need. Do you see the picture of that? That's expanding your boundaries. It's something that Americans aren't really good at, because we like to spend everything we have for us, don't we? Our community garden that we had, it was amazing. When you talk to Rick, he said the amount of produce that we got out of that like half an acre there, he says the math doesn't add up. We shouldn't have gotten that much produce. But I think God blessed it so that we could bless others. And most of the food went to help the poor. I love what Alan Ferris does. He has a farm here north of here, and he has a small portion of his farm that he farms sweet corn. And he lets the poor come and glean from that and take it home with them. Isn't that great? That's God's heart. And so in the same way for us, he wants us to keep a margin, that we would expand our boundaries of our life and have it available to help those that are oppressed. And so I think there is a part of this that I think the church should respond to this issue of human trafficking. I think we should do something to alleviate the suffering of people around the world. I think the evangelical church in the past, they looked at this purely in a spiritual sense, that those that are oppressed or those that are suffering spiritually, we want to bring evangelism to them. We want them to come to Christ so that they can have a new life, right? And that's true. But I think the gospel, when I read the gospel, and you look especially the words of Jesus, he's always talking about a holistic gospel. It's much more than just sharing Jesus with them, it's sharing your resources with people. I love the story of Boaz and Ruth. In Ruth 2, Ruth goes with her mother-in-law, Naomi, because her husband had died, Naomi's son, and she follows her back to Israel. And Ruth is a Moabite. She's not a Jew, but she said to Naomi, because they were widows and so they were poor. Because in this culture, women just didn't work. You understand the picture here? And so Ruth says, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. This is exactly what we just read about in Deuteronomy. Is she says, I want to go for a farmer that has expanded their borders, and I want to go and be able to get food for us and bring it home. And so she goes to Boaz's field, and she starts gleaning from what is left. Boaz notices her out there, and he has mercy on her. And he tells his workers, let her have whatever she wants, and don't let any harm come to her. And he eventually falls in love with her, and they get married. So maybe you're single. No, I'm just kidding. Ruth was a widow. She was poor. She was in distress. Boaz allowed the margins of his ancient border to be expanded to her and to provide for her needs. That is a picture, I think, of the gospel. That's a picture of the heart that God wants us to have for those that are oppressed and those that are suffering. The Apostle John in the letter of 1 John chapter 3, verse 16, he talks about this. And he says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. If anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need, but has no pity in him, how can the love of God be in him? Dear children, let us not love with words, our tongue, but with actions and in truth. You see, I think that's what the church needs to do. The church needs to respond with action, to do what we can to help this global issue. But the question is, what can we do? It's like when you see the numbers, it seems so broad and so vast. Can we do anything to help? I kind of struggled with this, to be honest. And this woman that I had coffee with this week, I says, well, you know that the issue is here. And she told me that just 2 weeks ago. She says, I now call myself a Christian. That she says, it just feels right. And I said, so if you are a Christian, what are you doing to help this issue? Because you know and understand this issue. And she said, it's a pretty organic thing that I just help whatever women come to me, and I have relationships with organizations that like the Halfway House and so forth, and when they see a girl that's being let out and she has no resources, they'll call me. And she says, I help them find a place to live. I help them find jobs. I buy them food. I buy them clothes. And she doesn't hardly have anything herself. She said, I got $60 left, and I'm going to go buy this woman some clothes because she needs clothes to be able to work in. She even went to this one woman's house that she didn't show up for work, and her boss called her and said, she's not here. So she went straight to the house. She woke her up, and she got her up. She said, you go to work. And she took her to work. That's how involved she is, so that these women don't have to fall back into getting addicted to drugs and getting caught up into this whole thing of prostitution and human trafficking. It's a great thing, and it's not a huge thing. She's helping 1 or 2 women right now, and she says, I'm just available for whatever the Lord brings before me. But how do we expand our borders? What is something tangible that we can do? I think one of the things we have to overcome, what Fields of the Fatherless, the book talks about, is one of the things that keeps us, the church, from getting involved is fear. We have a fear that we're going to be inconvenienced. We have a fear that this may endanger my life. We have a fear that this will ruin my reputation. It's going to be costly. And so we just don't get involved. Another obstacle is it just seems so big that what can I do? Does that resonate with any of you guys? Well, what I wanted to do was do something that was localized and very practical and easy for us to do. Now this will only scratch the surface, mind you, but at least it's something that we can get started. So, Light Gives Heat is a great ministry that's right here in our community, their office and their warehouse. And what Light Gives Heat has done is this couple went to Uganda to adopt their daughter, and they ended up needing to stay there for 2 years until the adoption went through. And while they were there, they noticed these Ugandan women that were destitute, that had nothing, and they had no means to make a living. And so the culture in Uganda, and this is all over Africa, is that a woman is like the man's property. And so a man will have a woman that's like a wife, and they'll have relations sexually, and she'll get pregnant, and then he'll just dump her and go find someone else. And he doesn't provide for her. And so the woman has no rights in Uganda, and so she has no means to make a living. And so the only way she can find a way to provide for herself and for her children is getting involved in human trafficking, for becoming a prostitute, or even selling her children to traffickers. And so what they've done is this very ingenious thing, is they take scrap material like paper, and they have learned how to make these great necklaces and bracelets, jewelry. It's called the Subi beads. And so they have a number of these women that they have provided a sustainable means for them to make a living, that they can have what they need of food and resources, they can provide for their kids, and they don't have to get sucked into this darkness of prostitution and human trafficking. And so I want us to watch this video of Light Gives Heat and see what an amazing... This is actually a video, it's a trailer of a movie that's been made for them. And you'll see in this trailer, you'll see their ministry that they have there in Uganda. Let's watch this. David Morgan, who started this ministry, it's amazing what God has done and how He's blessed this ministry. And if you would feel called to buy any of their beads or their bags that they made, it goes to these women that are making them, and it helps provide for them in a very tangible way. So that's why I asked them to come and set up their booth in the lobby with their goods. Now, you can buy something for yourself. You can buy something and give it for a Christmas present coming up. You can buy a number of things from them and sell them for them. And so they are open to various ways that we can be involved to help with that. And so they actually have their warehouse over on Westlow off of 25 Road, and stop in there anytime and talk to them, and they'll share with you the great things that they're doing. So that's Light Gives Heat. The second thing that you can do is just get more educated. This You Count campaign from Timberline, it's amazing the research that they've done and the organizations that they've tapped into. And on the information desk, there's some brochures and flyers there that you can pick up, and you can look at the number of organizations that are actually out there doing some very significant work of helping people that are caught in human trafficking. One of the ones that I've grown a great respect for is the International Justice Mission. And what International Justice Mission does is they actually infiltrate these prostitution rings and so forth, and then they will work with the local police and authorities and find out who the kingpin's in and send them in and arrest them. And then they take the women and children that are caught up into this, and they put them in safe houses, and they start educating them and giving them the tools they need to be able to survive. So that's International Justice Mission. And can I have the worship team come up? So as we've talked about all these things, the main thing is I wanted you guys to see that there is some very practical, easy ways that you can get involved and you can make a difference. You may not have the funds to buy anything, but maybe you can write your congressman and you can say, we need to do what we can to stop this. Maybe you can pray for these organizations that are listed in the You Count campaign brochures. You can just pray for them, that God would use them to bring a relief to the suffering that these people are in around the world. The main thing is we just can't continue to sit back and do nothing. I just don't think that that's what God would have us to do. And I know that when we do these human justice months, they're not the most famous times for people that they say, I just wish Kirk would quit talking about these things. But the reality is, I think, as we read in the scriptures, when we come to the aid of those that are suffering, that those that are in bondage, and those that are in slavery, God will pour out his heart in us, and God will bring blessings that you've never experienced before until you start answering the call. So let's stand, and as we worship, let's ask of the Lord, what would you have us to do? Pray that the Lord would give you his heart for these particular issues around the world. Let's go to the Lord now.